Brendan's real beef is he got hammered after that Rangers game, and he, maybe rightly, maybe wrongly, is going, hold on a minute here, I've barely put a foot wrong for 12 months.
It's as if now the fans are doing something against Greg Taylor. Like, well, the club aren't backing him either because he doesn't have a deal.
Singing about Kieran Tierney, which is effectively nothing to do with Greg Taylor, is a direct disrespect to Greg Taylor, but very publicly trying to sign Kieran Tierney to replace Greg Taylor in the press. That's fine, is it? Right?
Yes. Welcome to this week's episode of 20 Minute Tim's flagship podcast. In the new studio, I'm your host Jamie, and I'm joined by Stephen.
How's it going? Good to be back.
And Melly.
Yes.
Right, tell the truth. Which one of you two were singing the Kieran Tierney song? Fess up. Admit it.
Just outright disrespect, wasn't it? Outrageous behaviour.
We're going to talk about the Rangers game, obviously, and the St Mirren game and everything else. But the big news, I think, this weekend is Brendan Rodgers. He was fuming, Stephen.
Aye, a curious one, to be honest. Now, everyone has responded to this in some way or other, and it's dominated the headlines in a week where Celtic had probably the worst performance in any recent season that we can all remember. And only suffered 1 point worth of a damage to it eventually. But what has dominated the last sort of 24 hours is Brendan Rodgers getting a few things off his chest. And notably, the main two things were, one, not happy with the fans' response to how the team were playing against, who was that, St Mirren? And the other one was, as you say, singing the Kieran Tierney song amid hot speculation that he's coming back to the club. I think he kind of lost that a wee bit. I don't look. Brendan Rodgers is an intelligent man. It's not like he's out there just having an absolute meltdown. But I think he very easily switched into, I'm going to get a few things off my chest here while he had the opportunity. The thing about the passing back, now coincidentally, we had an At the Match podcast out on our Patreon service, which you can get at patreon.com/20minutetims, right? So we, after every match, we stand a few 100 feet from the stadium and we talk about the performances just happened. I made a very similar point about the way that the game flows. Now, I'm not going to Brend-splain to Brendan Rodgers, but what he said was that when we pass back the way, it's to change the point of attack. Now, I said something very similar on the podcast, basically at the same time as he was saying it in a different press conference, because that's what we're doing. We're doing our own press conference outside the stadium. So I said that, look, sometimes when the ball goes back, it's because you're able to move the opposition around. Just because, for example, let's see if Trusty plays the ball into midfield to Greg Taylor. More on him to come, right? If he passes to Greg Taylor and then Greg Taylor passes immediately back to Trusty, it might well be that whoever was, this is just an example off the top of my head, it might well be that whoever was tasked with either pressing Trusty or standing off Trusty has now abandoned that and moved back into a more sort of midfield area. And therefore, if you pass back to Trusty, he's suddenly got loads and loads of space to change the point of attack. So I totally agree with that. However, I think it was slightly disingenuous to avoid speaking about the fact, in my opinion, having been at the game, that the reason everyone was tense at that game was because we were absolutely gubbed off Rangers 3 days before.
I said it was a question of trust, Melly, which I thought, people do trust you, Brendan. I don't think it's a question of trust. I've got my own thoughts about why people get a bit tense at these games. And I think what Stephen says is right. It was the fact that it was immediately off the back of the Rangers result, although that would be a bit unfair because it's, to be fair to Brendan, this isn't a one-time occurrence. Do you know what I mean? Like, people, we know from going to the games, people will moan at absolutely everything. Celtic Park's a tense atmosphere recently, and I think what Brendan's saying is like, ease up a wee bit.
It's difficult because if you take out the Rangers game and Celtic had come off the back of 2-4-0s and then beat St Mirren 3-0, and Brendan's coming on and going, look guys, you need to trust us when we're playing the way we are. If we pass it back, it's to go forward. Yes, that's fine, but planting the Rangers game back in there, we trusted you going into that. We thought this is a great opportunity to beat our big rivals, go 17 points clear. They've got a patchwork defence, go out and take them apart. And Celtic could barely muster a shot in the whole game. So I understand where he's coming from the fans' point of view, because you get people around you and it's just like, come on mate, go and chill out a bit. It's a home game where, like he said, we've been playing every 3 days and we will be for the foreseeable. There's going to be times where you can break a team down early, and sometimes there's going to be times where you don't. The St Mirren game was fine. The only difference with the St Mirren game to any other game was it was off the back of the Rangers game, and that was the worst performance of Celtic.
Do you think that's what it is? Do you think, because this isn't new, this moaning when the ball goes back, it's funny enough, we do a Q&A every second Friday on Patreon. It's called the Friday Phone In, and we get questions about we happen to get a question about the Celtic Park atmosphere.
Yeah.
I think the point Brendan was making was, and to be honest, he's right. He is right. Like, you can't just moan for the sake of it when the ball goes back, and then expect that to have a productive result on the players. Do you know what I mean? If you pass the ball back, it was all for God's sake. I think, weirdly, I think the frustration comes from, because there is that trust there. I'm not making excuses and trying to tell both sides are right, but I don't think fans would get pissed off if they weren't like, just go and batter them, Celtic, go and shows, do that thing you always do. And I think a lot of the time it comes from that. It comes from, why are we doing? Just steamroll over the top of them, Celtic. We know you can. Don't play within yourselves.
For me, it's the what's been labelled at Celtic, and it's possibly true, I've said it myself, is it can be slow, and it's something that's followed Brendan Rodgers from his first spell. At the last season of that, it's slow, it's ponderous, it's very passive, and it was just that sort of horseshoe passing about. But he's came back, and I think it's been different. I think it has been quicker, but that perceptions came along with it, because that's what people remember. The big problem here is in the Rangers game, in the cup final, Bruges and Zagreb, it seems like Celtic defenders have a lot of the ball and are on the ball a lot, and there's not a lot of quick passing play to get it from there. So this is frustration that in big games, Celtic seem like it's passing for passing's sake a lot of the times, and that bore fruit in the Rangers game, where Celtic had a lot of the ball. Every time they tried to make a pass into midfield and it was intercepted, Rangers sprung in Celtic, and they got a victory that was 3-0, could have been more, and Celtic barely had a shot at Rangers' goal. And to be honest, it's one of the worst derby, it probably is the worst derby performance I've seen since Rangers came into the league. So for that to come after, and then the St Mirren game come after that, and you're looking at, in these big games, Celtic aren't getting the ball in areas where they can hurt teams enough, because Rangers, yes, they did score 3 goals, but they should have played so much better in that final.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here a wee bit. Do you really think that the groans for the crowd in the St Mirren game are for that, or do you just think it's a general misunderstanding of what Brendan Rodgers is trying to do? Because I think there's a big part of, particularly with Brendan, that he does have. I think Brendan's got a lot more support in the Celtic fans than he thinks, but I think sometimes he's very, very guarded, very, very media trained. He doesn't explain an awful lot. Like, just contrast Ange, for example. I'm not comparing them as managers, but Ange kind of wore his heart on his sleeve a wee bit. He was very open about the football he was trying to play. I think Brendan Rodgers just thinks, well, I've built a winning team here, so if I do something that's on purpose, trust me. Football doesn't really ever work like that, Stephen, but I feel that now that he's come out and explained, by the way, we're doing this because we're trying to change the angle of attack, because we're trying to move defences about, I don't think that a lot of people necessarily inherently just, one, understand that, and then two, are just going to be happy about it. I think now that he's mentioned it, explained it, things might change a wee bit.
I mean, probably. I think
not necessarily people are going to be we're not going to be buzzing about it. We're not going to, like, Brendan, when he said cheer the back pass, I did think, like, you've overstepped the mark there a wee bit. Like, okay, it doesn't have to be forward all the time, but you know, if it's 20 minutes in against St Mirren and people think we should be battering them, we're not going to cheer a back pass. We will cheer a player trying something. We'll cheer a player that goes on a run, or we'll cheer a player that maybe tries a difficult pass and it doesn't come off. We'll cheer these things. You're not going to get a cheer for a back pass anywhere, really.
Probably not. And it would be slightly excessive, I think, to expect that, especially going from vehemently hating back passes to, oh, that was brilliant. That was the best back pass I've seen this entire game. Well done, Greg Taylor, for the 12th time this first 20 minutes. I don't know how much of it is down to, people expect us to be 5-0 up at half time every week. I think that's overdoing it, to be honest. I think that's, as much as I understand and agree with the premise posed here, is that we're trying to change the point of attack. I can only speak for where I sit. You can't speak for the entire stadium because that's ludicrous. It's massive. Like, yes. I don't know what's going on in every section. I can only speak for what's going around us. And it's not. I rarely see that. It's not like it's every week. We don't see every week people moaning and groaning at back passes. I don't think people are daft. There is a threshold after which or over which people get fed up with seeing it over and over and over again, and especially coupled with the fact that we've just, as I say, turned in the worst performance anyone can remember against Rangers. I think people are just a bit tetchy about it.
Yeah. I think that's it.
Yeah.
I think the real problem, Melly, here is Brendan's real beef is he got hammered after that Rangers game, and he, maybe rightly, maybe wrongly, is going, hold on a minute here, I've barely put a foot wrong for 12 months.
Yeah.
Aye, okay, we have a bad day and it was a bad result, but I get absolutely slaughtered for that. Then I come here and you're booing me. It's like every day's a fresh piece of paper and I need to prove myself again. And I don't think Brendan was annoyed at the booing at the back pass, is my point. I think that was venting because something's upset him, something's pissed him off. He's something other than that has annoyed him.
And by the way, no one booed back passes. It's just there was a few grumbles. I think he was getting it. There was a general sort of groan from the crowd. It's not as if we're all like booing. I mean, that would be mental if we're standing booing back passes or individual players.
There's a person that sits near me that I realise I'm a known podcaster and I need to be careful.
What, cut this out?
Aye, but there is somebody near me that groans at absolute throwing. Oh, for God's sake! I'm like, have you ever been to a football game where there's never been a throw-in? Relax.
Ball in play for the whole game. Somebody near us moaned when Greg Taylor done it. And again, it's become this thing that Greg Taylor's not having the best season for himself, his own standards, but it is talked about a lot that he does pass the ball back a lot. And when it happened again against St Mirren, then there was a groan in front of us, and I was like, come on, man, it's early doors against St Mirren, who are a well set up team. But the reason I think it was off the back of the Rangers game and the fans, because we went into that game expecting probably a win, definitely expecting a better performance for that, and definitely not expecting to see that performance. But the reason I think it's like that is because that St Mirren game, the performance of that in the first half and throughout the game was much better than a few of the games we've seen previously this season. But because it came off the back of the Rangers game, like, there was games under Ange where Celtic played better on Sunday than they did under Ange in domestic games.
Yeah.
But because this came off the back of taking a tanking off your rivals, people are just a bit, what was that? And then the passing back, I think, reminds people that's why we got ourselves into trouble against Rangers, because we kept passing it back and we weren't getting it into dangerous positions. That's why it kept happening. And look, St Mirren are a totally different team. It's not going to happen like that. But I just think people were frustrated, and this was the first way they could vent their frustration. Same way it was the first way Brendan Rodgers got to vent his frustration after it.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with Brendan on the sort of trust. People do.
Yeah.
People do. I think you're never going to get a cheer. You're never going to get a cheer for a back pass. Maybe I can understand what he's trying to do, explain to the fans a wee bit more, and he's probably getting annoyed, and he probably hears things on the touchline that you, as a general member, he probably hears over his shoulder players getting pelters and all that, and you see it with other man, you see Ange as well in Spurs directly having it out with fans behind the dugout, saying, I'm trying to do something here, and this is probably Brendan's only chance he gets to do that.
Yeah, when he came out dressed casual, I was like, oh, something's a bit different here. Then he went football casual on us, didn't he? He went for it. But for me, it's the off the back of that game and the way it's portrayed. It's as if it's just a one-off, as if this team's let us down a lot this season, and why don't you trust us? But if Brendan Rodgers had come out with this last season, I would probably go, do you know what? I agree with him a bit just now, but if last season when we were struggling, if he came out with this, you'd go, understand why he's saying this, because he's saying, look, trust us, we're in a process here. But this team haven't let us down a lot this season, so I don't think we need to be questioning the trust. Maybe some fans don't trust him or don't trust the team, but for me, I do. I think this is a good team that has went out and done very well this season. There's just been certain games that we've not quite met our own standards.
I've just not seen anybody really no trust in Brendan. Really?
No,
I've no. In fact, we were talking about on the Rangers post-match team, we were talking about the opposite. How the overwhelming backlash you got, if you moaned about the Rangers performance, the overwhelming backlash you got was, relax, mate, we've hardly lost a game. Like, there was more than that than I've ever seen. Another thing that Brendan said, which I thought, this thing about singing about Kieran Tierney, is I don't think that, and I've got plenty of thoughts on Greg Taylor, as people will be rolling their eyes at this, because see for a player who is just a general Celtic player, right? Greg Taylor takes up a lot of airtime on this podcast, but just things seem to happen that he seems to get brought up, and he was brought to the fore again. But I don't think there's any correlation whatsoever between singing about Kieran Tierney and Greg Taylor. I just don't think that's the case. Now the singing about Kieran Tierney thing to me is quite curious, right? Because you've got Greg Taylor, a player here who is apparently at the door, and everyone's like, good riddance and all that. You're seeing all that. Meanwhile, they're saying, can't wait to get Kieran Tierney back, a player who actually did leave. I don't really get the...
Shortly after Brendan did.
Brendan. I don't really get the sort of politics of that situation as far as leaving and staying and who's a rat and who isn't a rat and all that sort of stuff, right? But Kieran Tierney left. He's rumoured to be coming back. Again, just standard football stuff. He's a player that's held in high regard by a lot of the Celtic support and especially the Green Brigade and all that, and they want to see him back. I don't join these dots between the Greg Taylor. And to be honest, I would be amazed if Greg Taylor did. I really would be. There's plenty of players out there who I'd be amazed if he even noticed they were singing Kieran Tierney's song. He went straight up the tunnel at full time, and there's some speculation that spat the dummy out and had the hub. I'm pretty sure he went straight up the tunnel at full time because he
got a bash in the nose,
bonked his nose, and it nearly broke his nose. I really don't think it was anything to do with this.
Well, Adam Ida went straight up the tunnle after he was substituted.
He hates Kieran Tierney too.
I mean, it just happens. Maybe he was caught short. Maybe he was caught short and just needed to go. Well, two separate issues that we're talking about here: the reaction to the back passes and Brendan's subsequent defence of that. And I should say right here and now that he is perfectly entitled to come out and defend both his approach and his players' performances, entirely entitled to do so. My issue with it is that we can't sit here as Celtic players, managers, fans, podcasters, whatever, and just blank that Rangers game like that as if it didn't happen. Trust my players, look at this, look at what they've done in recent weeks. But that was 3 days ago. People are still annoyed about it, and I think that's perfectly natural. So he is perfectly entitled to come and say all this stuff. And then there was media members coming out. It was Tam McManus, I think, came out and said, the fans are entitled. That's where I draw the line. It's no entitlement. I don't subscribe to that stuff at all. No. And no one said anything about wanting to be 5-0 up at half-time. Nobody said anything about how every single pass in the game has to be forwards. That's silliness. I draw the line at entitlement, even if I do agree with the overall point that we could probably just ease off on that stuff a wee bit. However, the Kieran Tierney stuff I thought was miles off. I genuinely did. It's one of the rare occasions where on the way back from the game, Mel, you put in our group chat that some interesting comments from Brendan post-match. Check it out.
Which was annoying, by the way. As a member of this group chat, I'm like, what? Where? What did he say? Where can I find these comments?
So I basically got to that. When I got to the car, I looked, that's interesting. So I got the road and I went to take them in. I was just kind of bewildered by it. I was like, I don't understand this, which has led me to believe that what I said going into this is basically my whole point, is that I think he used it as an opportunity to get a few things off his chest and hit back at a couple of people, and fair enough. But I do not agree with the Kieran Tierney thing at all. I do not think it had anything to do with Greg Taylor. I cannot join those dots.
But now everyone's talking about Greg Taylor. You go online and it's Greg. And what the manager's done is put Greg Taylor in the firing line, and a lot of people are now just think he took the huff, think he's upset and pissed off about the Kieran Tierney thing, and they're all talking about the Greg Taylor contract thing again. And you're just like, this was... If I was Greg Taylor, I wouldn't necessarily be thanking Brendan for drawing those comparative lines, because it's needless.
Completely under the bus, to be honest. And I know that's not Brendan Rodgers' intention. That's literally the opposite of what he intended there. But with bringing Greg Taylor's feelings into it, what it looks like to some people, and I'll be honest, look, people will use any opportunity possible to have a go at Greg Taylor because people don't like him. I've not got a problem with that. It's well established that Greg Taylor isn't the most popular player at Celtic, but people will leap on that, latch onto that and think he's grasped the fans into Brendan Rodgers, and Brendan Rodgers is coming out and hitting back. And it's not helped by people tweeting how he went straight up a tunnel. Who cares? Like, grow up. Like, honestly, straight up. Genuinely, see if you're offended by somebody going straight up a tunnel who's had a blow to the nose or whatever could be wrong with him, right? Honestly, the idea that we should be focusing on this is silly to me. But the Kieran Tierney thing, the only reason that I can perceive that anyone is singing about Kieran Tierney is because Celtic are very publicly trying to sign Kieran Tierney. I've never heard a Kieran Tierney song sung in the stadium since he left. Prior
Correct.
to there,
Good point.
right?
Yeah.
So it's not as if we're. The only reason it was Kieran Tierney is because Celtic are trying to sign Kieran Tierney. No denial of that. And in fact, in my opinion, they have been briefing the press that they're about to sign Kieran Tierney. The story's very conveniently snuck out after the Rangers pumping as well, right? So they are publicly chasing Kieran Tierney. The fans have latched onto that, excited about Kieran Tierney coming back. They sing his name. It's not, let's not frame this as Celtic fans were singing the names of better players to get revenge on them for playing the ball backwards.
It doesn't make any sense.
It's insane.
And it'd be the same if we were linked with Jota. People would be singing the Jota song.
Aye, and where do we draw the line with this as well? I know Kieran Tierney, it's because we're being linked with him, but clubs of, or rather fans of all clubs, sing the names of players from the past. Man United will still sing about Cantona. People will sing. It happens all the time. So I don't get this angle. And what are the rules here? So singing about Kieran Tierney, which is effectively nothing to do with Greg Taylor, is a direct disrespect to Greg Taylor, but very publicly trying to sign Kieran Tierney to replace Greg Taylor in the press. That's fine, is it? Right? So,
we're singing about him. You're trying to sign him.
And a final thing about Greg Taylor has always been very honest. Jamie, you asked him to his face. We get a bit of press opportunity at the end of last season. You asked him to his face about, I think, or rather,
who cuts your hair? That's what I would ask him now.
So it was basically he spoke about how he's not bothered about speculation. Right, his entire existence at Celtic has been built upon. He's about to be replaced. He's not good enough. We need to replace him. He's the weak link. And he acknowledged every single bit of that. The idea that he would have spent 5 years doing this and now he can't take it because Kieran Tierney's been linked in the press and we've sung it. To me, it doesn't make any sense. And I can't really defend Brendan Rodgers on that. I'm sure he's not bothered. I'm not attacking him for it. But to me, it didn't make any sense at all.
We get pelters on the podcast for sort of a couple of years ago deciding to defend Greg Taylor. When Ange came about and sort of things changed for him a wee bit. And then this sort of stuff, Melly, where Kieran Tierney's linked and then Greg Taylor was thrown under the bus a wee bit by that, or pushed onto stage by Brendan Rodgers again. And all this, you see the stuff online about Greg Taylor and the whole Greg Taylor discourse kicks off again. And honestly, I kind of don't get it with Greg Taylor, right? So for the final time, hopefully, right, honestly, for the final time, I have slaughtered Greg Taylor on this podcast. We all have, right? Everyone's copped it, including Greg Taylor. Greg Taylor isn't anyone's, like, no one's sitting here going, Greg Taylor's the best left back since X, Y, and Z and all that. So it's not like fake fandom.
He is the best left back since Kieran Tierney.
Well, he is the best left back since Kieran Tierney, but it's no fake fandom for clicks or attention. I just think people developed an opinion about Greg Taylor when he signed 5 years ago and they've never let it go. But if you could sum up Greg Taylor's entire Celtic career, it would probably be by the phrase, who Greg Taylor? Because when he joined, if you said, that guy's going to win 3 titles, a treble, whatever Scottish Cups, League Cups, you say, who Greg Taylor? If you were going to say, oh, we've just spent 4 million quid on bowling goalie, he's not going to get in the team. Why? Because Greg Taylor, we've went and signed a left back from Lazio. He's going to get kept out of the team. By who? Greg Taylor. We've went to Argentina, signed a £4 million left back for Argentina. He won't get in the team. He'll be kept out. By who? Greg Taylor. And it goes on and on. If he's going to become, see that Greg Taylor, he's going to become a critical part of what Ange Postecoglou wants to do in achieving the success. Oh, who? Greg Taylor? Yes, Greg Taylor would. If he's going to become a leader in the dressing room and one of the main voices and one of the sort of bigger figures. Who? Greg Taylor? Yes, Greg Taylor. And it's not that he's this amazing player, but I was having this conversation with someone recently. Yeah, he's bang average. Yes, he might be an average footballer, right, in your opinion, but he gives 100% to Celtic at all times. And through his Celtic career, you have seen the growth of the guy. And I don't really know what more you expect for somebody that comes, applies himself 100%, plays the games he does, contributes in the way that Greg Taylor does, and keeps numerous other left backs out of the squad. I'm not really sure what more you expect for a guy that we signed from Kilmarnock for 2 million quid. And I think the guy deserves, if no credit, right, because people don't want to give the guy credit, at least he deserves a wee bit of respect and cut him some slack. Brendan.
This is the problem now, because Greg Taylor, when I heard it came up on the radio that they were going to be Brendan Rodgers has made some comments, some big comments, and I was, wonder what this is, and it talked about the passing back, and I was like, do you know what, fair enough, I agree with that there. And then it said, and then he had some comments about Kieran Tierney, and instantly you go, oh, is he going to say we're going for him? Is he going to say we're definitely not going for him? Never did I think it would come out the way it came out about him. So if he had just left it at the passing back, I don't think it would have been a big deal. Would have gone, Joe, that's fine. But for this to be, us to be talking about Greg Taylor again when he's out of contract, well, he's out of contract in the summer and he can speak to other clubs. Like, Greg Taylor is under so much speculation because you, Brendan Rodgers, you've been the manager for 18 months now.
Yeah.
And in that time, you could have offered him a contract. You could have got him to agree a contract because numerous other players have been there while you've come in and signed 4 or 5 year deals with 5.5 year deals for some players. So there has been there. And it's not to have a go at Brendan Rodgers, but it's as if now the fans are doing something against Greg Taylor. Like, well, the club aren't backing him either because he doesn't have a deal. I wouldn't have a problem with Greg Taylor getting a deal and Kieran Tierney being signed, because if Kieran Tierney does sign, we're going to need 2 good left backs.
Yeah.
And I think Greg Taylor is one. And for people to call him bang average, what does that say for the players that he's kept out? What does that say for players who have been and gone and played in different positions to Greg Taylor that were good players, but because Greg Taylor's had this longevity, because he's always seen as the weakest link, it puts down his ability. I don't agree with it.
I don't want to pit one player against another, and honestly, like, no offence to Greg Taylor, right? But I just don't want this discourse to be rumbling on all season. But I've got a friend who loves Liam Scales and hates Greg Taylor, right?
Right, okay.
And no offence to Liam Scales here, and I don't want to be pitting Celtic players against each other, but the best Liam Scales can hope for is to become Greg Taylor. The absolute best. But there's just this sort of weird dissonance between them. But anyway, I've said my piece on it, and we wouldn't be talking about it right now had Brendan Rodgers decided not to say that singing about Kieran Tierney was somehow disrespectful to Greg Taylor. I don't buy that. To put a button on it, I don't buy that for 1 minute.
No, and the question itself with the press, but the guy had barely even finished asking it before Brendan Rodgers said just outright disrespect, or however, I'm paraphrasing.
That felt
just a
planted.
Complete lack of respect. I think it was a reflex, because I think well, I could only speculate. I can't read the guy's mind, but to me, it felt like a question was going to be some fans singing about Kieran Tierney. Is there any movement on that transfer? There's been a lot of speculation, but before he even finished that, it was a few fans singing about Kieran Tierney. Total lack of respect.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know. To me, it felt like an eruption of just frustration from Brendan
Rodgers. To me,
Rodgers.
it felt like a setup, Stephen, because I've just, my spider senses were thinking, because it was the same journalist that asked them about the back pass booing.
Okay,
and then that let Brendan say the bit on that, and then it was the second journalist that came up with the Kieran Tierney thing. It's almost as if he'd sort of says, "Look, see, I've got a wee bit to say. If you could ask me about this," and then maybe not.
A wee assist.
Maybe an assist, and Brendan Rodgers got the tap in. Listen, that we felt that it was worth mentioning the sort of Brendan Rodgers. Because honestly, I don't know. That was the first time
out of nowhere.
Yeah, that was the first time in a while I've listened to Brendan Rodgers, and I thought, look, I kind of get it, but you're missing the mark here. You're missing the mark here a wee bit about the trust. People do trust you. People do back the team. The Kieran Tierney thing didn't make sense. The bringing up Greg Taylor didn't make sense. The fact that you had to remind everyone that people think he's not very good in the Champions League, I thought that was like, why bother bring that up? But the whole week, Melly, has really been framed around the Rangers game, and obviously it was a wee while now, and if you wanted immediate reaction to that and live build-up and everything else, live reaction, patreon.com/20minutetims is where we were reacting to all that. But Melly, it was important, I think, to put in a good performance against St Mirren, and I don't think anyone really can be too surprised, given Rangers' form, that after the 2 fixtures passed, we managed to increase our lead over the course of the week.
Well, minimise it. So it was 14 points going into the week, and then we've ended up with 13. But
yes,
extended it from Thursday.
Yes, extended it from Thursday, and I just think that's what, champions don't just show up for one game, one game a calendar year.
On that, that's already that in the bin, isn't it? Lost 2 games the previous calendar year, lost 1 already. This one,
no invincible treble this year. I'm going to boo every game now.
Every back pass.
I know. How many days on are we for this Rangers game, Melly? Because over Christmas, New Year, you don't really know.
Nah.
No, it was the 2nd, and today's the 6th. Is it?
So we're 4 days on. How do you feel?
Still very disappointed. Good to get the victory over St Mirren and sort of the laughter when they drop points again. But that laughter's always brilliant because it's one of the joys of life when the Bears drop points and you know on your way home you're going to be hearing some super scoreboard after the game and Celtic got the victory. That was great. But looking back at it now, Rangers over the piece had 4 games, didn't win 3 of them and won 1 of them, and the one was against us, and it wasn't
Makes you sick.
it wasn't a fluke victory, it wasn't a dodgy decision. They absolutely battered Celtic and had the most shots that Celtic have ever faced. Celtic had the least shots, the worst XG they've ever had as well. It was a terrible performance, and even when you try to look back at it and frame it differently, there was nothing for Celtic, absolutely nothing. It was toothless. It looked like they were playing with fear. It looked like they were shook. They let in an early goal. They let in a goal from a set piece. And then Rangers were just taking the ball off.
Just missing a red card for the full house, wasn't it? Yeah,
it did have the feeling of a red card game, didn't it?
But even the red card, if we had got it, like, remember the Beaton game where he gets sent off and like Celtic were never going to win that game? We didn't even have that excuse there. It was 11 v 11. Celtic had no injury worries. Rangers had injuries all over the place, missing a captain, centre-halves, goalkeeper. Celtic couldn't even muster creating chances against that, and that was the big disappointment. We went into that game trusting the team to go and perform because that's what they've done. They haven't really let us down a lot. We've had the odd game where you think maybe we should have done better, but we're judging the team by their own standards, and then to go in and dish out that performance where nobody showed up, and we can't keep going to this and going into this game going Celtic just didn't turn up. No, Celtic did turn up and they just did not perform at all.
Hey, the man of the moment, Brendan Rodgers, said it was maybe some sort of underlying fact that they were 14 points or whatever ahead that maybe lulled the performance or something a wee bit. I don't know if that kind of flies in the face of. He says it was
else he says over the course of the year how you need to work. You can't let standards slip. And
also, come on, this is a Rangers game, man. I know. I get it. We're all being disingenuous about this because not only the St Mirren game but the Rangers game. Let's talk about dead rubber and all that nonsense as well going in. Don't give me any of that. It was terrible.
It was. Like I said, it was a wee bit. I didn't really tie in because I just wonder if there's a wee bit of me that thought that's dangerous to think that this was like. I'm not saying this is necessarily approach, but if you go, it was just a bad day at the office. We don't know what happened. It's kind of intangible. Maybe that's just Brendan doing a bit of PR talk. He doesn't want to give too much credit to Rangers and he doesn't want to dwell on it, so he just sort of bats it away. But when I was watching the game, as Mel said, it just looked like a team that were completely set up wrong. And I know people get touchy when you start to talk about tactics, and it's difficult when you don't know an awful lot about the ins and outs and intricacies of football tactics to say, look,
Brendan would have you believe you don't know anything about football, given his comments.
Compared to Brendan, I don't, right? But what I would say is, I don't need to be a Michelin star chef to know that like some food is off, and I don't need to be Steven Spielberg to know that a film's crap. And sometimes when you're and it doesn't necessarily mean that I get in the kitchen and fix it, or I can get behind the camera and sort it. But when I'm watching something, I go, this really doesn't look right. There's lots of mistakes happening all over the pitch, and when 11 players all look as if they're having a bad game, then my attention kind of turns to the manager and goes, there's something going on here. Now, the retort usually comes back, well, what would you do? Well, I don't know because I'm not a football manager, but I've seen plenty of football games, and that to me looked like it wasn't just a bad day at the office. It wasn't just a team that switched off because they were 14 points ahead. It just looked like a team that couldn't get to grips with the game, mistakes all over the park. It looked like those square passes across the back that we've spoken about numerous times punishing us. It looked like midfielders not being able to turn. It looked like Kuhn not being able to get on the ball. No chances for Hugo. It just looked like a complete mess all over. It didn't look like a team fractionally off it. It looked like a team completely unprepared for the opposition.
Well, I think at the time after the cup final, I described the first half as a failure of game plan. Now, I know that sounds like dramatic language, but what I meant by that was that it didn't really seem to tactically flow very well in the final. Now, what we've seen in the derbies this season, I know that people are sensitive about conceding any ground to Rangers and admitting that they have got anything right whatsoever, but you look at the flow of the derbies, or rather the progression of the derbies, is Celtic comfortably won the first one, a draw leading to penalties, separated by one penalty in the end in the middle one, and then a complete reversal at Ibrox. I know that home, away, neutral plays into that, but there has been suggestions, and I mean, I think saying things like Clement has Brendan Rodgers' number is a little bit excessive, to be honest. I think that's a little bit dramatic to say, but I also don't think it's too much to say that, well, he's probably learned something. He's probably learned in from ways, maybe even outside the derbies, looking at games like Zagreb, like Bruges, like United. Like, there are ways to frustrate Celtic. It is possible to do it, and these teams have managed to do it. In the derby, the first half at least, or I mean, like, first half, the first 5 minutes seemed the same as well. It seemed like Celtic hadn't really worked out any way to progress the ball very quickly at all, and I think it very quickly fell apart. So the approach seemed completely wrong. The delivery on the day was deeply wrong, and to the point where I can't take any positives from it whatsoever. And again, I come back to the same point. This is a derby we're talking about here, so any of this, it's a bad day at the office. We forget it. We've been good for months. But they
kind of exist in isolation a wee bit, these games, don't they?
Yeah, it's what it's all about as well. We spend all the time talking about the standards. You need to get it. You need to understand the requirement to win every game. Kind of just shrug off a derby like that, even though I totally concede that it hasn't really sustained Celtic any damage whatsoever. There's only 1 point of a difference, as I previously said. But it's like, I had to laugh at some of the comments that come out after a game like that, or after Rangers drop points again against Hibs. It's a lot of kind of, see, the bedwetters were wrong. See, you were all questioning the team and the manager. I'm like, right, but on what planet does Celtic losing the only game in 4 to that mob, and they're conceding goals left and right, and what planet do we come out of that looking better?
Yeah.
We look like the mugs in amongst like Motherwell and St Mirren and Hibs and all, or whoever else took points off them. So a deeply disappointing day. Disappointing is actually kind of softening it a little bit. I was fuming. I mean, we're a few days on from it. Again, I take that a lot of people are prepared to move on from it and want to look at the bigger picture, which is possible. We can do that now. That you zoom out and Celtic are in a great position, but that doesn't mean on the day you don't feel a bit of embarrassment, a bit of anger towards it.
Right, Melly. It is January officially, 2025. Believe it or not. That means January transfer window's opened. Kieran Tierney aside, who do we need? What do we need? Where do we need it? And when do we want it?
We need a left back. No disrespect, Greg. No disrespect.
How dare you?
It's a position that needs addressed. We have Greg Taylor out of contract, he's only on loan to the end of the season, and neither of these guys have really nailed down the position, and it seems to be it's something that needs addressed. For me, looking at the squad, we need a winger here and now. We need somebody that, for when Dyson Maeda is having a Dyson Maeda game, whichever way that goes, and when on the other side, like the game at Ibrox was crying out for something different on the wing, but you look to your bench and it's Palman Yang, and maybe that's why Brendan Rodgers left Hatate on, because he looked behind him and he was like, do I want to put Luke McCowan on at half time? I'm not so sure. So I think that's the positions, left back, winger, and I think for me, I don't know if it'll be addressed in January, but long term we need to address the midfield position. Callum McGregor or the sort of more attacking midfielder, where Rio Hatate, that needs addressed. Something needs to change. I don't know if Celtic are better going into a 4-2-3-1 and having an out-and-out number 10 and then having Engels and McGregor sitting, or if we're better getting in an out-and-out number 6 and moving McGregor forward alongside Engels. That's something that maybe Brendan Rodgers needs to look at, but he knows more than me. So for me, it's that midfield position needs
whatever. Put the boot in.
I know.
You know he's watching.
Scared, man.
He knows I love him. Long term, I think that's something needs addressed, because we haven't seen look, last season we had Matt O'Reilly and he's a brilliant player, and Brendan Rodgers spoke about it. We're not going to replace him in one window with one player. That's fine. We haven't got the balance of the midfield, and I don't think with the players we've got we're going to get the balance now. I did a podcast with Alex of The Athletic breaking down the Rangers game. He looked at it tactically, and maybe it's not as bad as we seem, but everything seemed to go wrong for Celtic in that. And asked him about Callum McGregor, and he said, do you think it's Callum McGregor that needs replaced? And his answer was very good, and you can hear that answer at patreon.com/20minute-tims.
It's only taken him how long, and he's learning, man.
What a pro.
I know, jeez.
New year,
Proud
new
of
me,
you, man.
new me. So it was good to hear from that side of how it went. But for me, left back, winger, I don't think we'll get much more than that, but the midfield needs addressed in the summer.
I thought Engels has been playing really well recently.
Yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning, Stephen, because we have sort of been critical of Engels on the podcast, but I think the 2 games prior to the Rangers game, I thought he was absolutely brilliant, and I know if it wasn't for illness, he probably would have played more of a part in the Rangers game. I thought, for me, I'm just diving back to the Rangers game podcast and sin here, but I've just remembered something that I thought the smoking gun for me was no changes at half time. I thought maybe Brendan Rodgers was the only guy in Glasgow that thought changes weren't required at half time, and he
Scales and Hatate should have been on for me. Yeah,
it was pretty mystifying that, and I thought maybe Engels would have come on a wee bit sooner. Maybe he wasn't fit enough. I'm not sure. But in terms of the January transfer window, I think a winger is an absolute must.
Yeah,
I think a winger's a must. And look, there's been rumours about Kyogo potentially going to Atlanta in MLS.
Yeah.
I don't know why they let Italian teams play there, but what a silly goose.
What
a silly goose I am, man.
You.
I know. But I would maybe look at that, because I think as much as I love Kyogo and he's been good, I do wonder if we've maybe seen the best of him, and business-wise, moving him on, taking that money, reinvesting it into another player wouldn't be necessarily a bad idea. I think we probably could. I think there's room for another striker at the club anyway. Obviously, left back, I think the Kieran Tierney thing, if he's signing a pre-contract and he's not going to play for Arsenal for the rest of the season, I don't think there's any reason why we wouldn't just bring him in.
Yeah, he's been on the bench for them a few times recently, quite disappointingly, because he was on the bench as we record this just the other night. And
I think 4 left backs in the bench.
Yeah, so the problem was
sending a message to the board.
We tweeted or X'd or whatever the hell it is you do on that wretched platform these days, right? So look, there's Kieran Tierney on the bench for Arsenal, and people were saying, that doesn't really mean much, because Ida played for Norwich 4 days before signing for Celtic, and it's London's only just down the road. But I was like, I want him now. I want him in for the St Mirren game. So we'll just need to bide our time on that one. The left back's an absolute must. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't know what's going on with Alex Bailly. It doesn't really seem to be fancied. I think there's been ample opportunity with all that's been surrounding Greg Taylor.
Yeah. However, Greg Taylor being as shit as he is, apparently,
And look, well, on that, I mean, we've all massively defended Greg Taylor over the years, but I don't think it's inappropriate or unfair to say I don't think he's been all that good recently. I don't think he's had a good season. I think he's been quite error prone. So the reason I say that just now is because there has been what looks like ample opportunity to play Alex Bailly, to take Taylor out of the firing line a little bit, and not really. Brendan Rodgers hasn't really seen fit to do so. He's played him on a couple of occasions, but he's never really staked much of a claim. So I think left back is an absolute must. The winger, I mean,
or two, maybe winger or two.
The winger. Although I won't repeat exactly what he said, but hilariously, the game the other night, when people were starting to kind of make their way out the stadium, there was no clock,
the
power cut, so we didn't have any big screens or a scoreboard, so nobody really knew what the time was in the game. But as people were starting to kind of filter out, it was freezing. Somebody did say that they weren't prepared, not in this language, but they weren't prepared to watch Palma because he was getting stripped off at the time and just left.
Hope Brendan didn't hear that.
Oh no, you should have seen me in there. But a winger's an absolute must. I think we've done the Yang and Palma stuff to death. No sense in going down that route. Suffice to say, I think we could sum that point up by just saying we need a winger, especially with Forrest injured as well.
Maybe two.
It could be. It could be that. I think at best the defence I hear for Yang is that it could do with a loan. So if that is the case, I personally don't really see what that would do for him. But if that is the case, then if he was to go out on loan, we're really left with just Kuhn and Maeda, really, because Palma's going to go. I think that's a bit of a dead set in this window. So potentially 2 wingers. I think that's an absolute cert. The midfield, I wondered, I know with the potential change in shape, I don't know if I see that coming, but with what you've suggested, do you have the scope there to play Bernardo as a more attacking presence in there? Because I know
he's creative enough.
I think that's probably right, but it's always stuck with me that when he came back to the club, he was asked about what kind of role he could see himself performing for Celtic, or why has Brendan Rodgers saw fit to bring you back. And he said that he sees himself very much as an attacking midfielder. I know that there was this belief that he's this kind of powerful runner, maybe like a box to box, maybe like I suppose it kind of is that. I'd kind of one of the number eights.
Him as that.
Yeah, one of the number eights. But he described himself as an attacking midfielder who wants to get forward and score more goals and create more assists. Now, I suppose there's a big difference between saying that at a press conference and actually being able to deliver it, because, like it or not, Matt O'Reilly has set the standard for that kind of position. Can he ever live up to that? Seems unlikely. But is it more or less likely than Celtic going out into the market and being able to sign a Matt O'Reilly in January? That probably seems even less likely.
It's a difficult one, because this window has now went back to the Peter Lawwell years, where it becomes a very important window for us, the most important, because we have Champions League qualifiers in the summer. Now, they will be, I think it's one round we've got, and it'll be late on, but we don't want to be like we were this summer, bringing in 3-4 players who are first teamers on deadline day. Big clubs don't run like that. So they sort of got it right in the players they brought in, but the way they went about it wasn't great. And all those players, whether it be Ida, Engels, Bernardo, Baye, Trusty, aren't regulars in the team now. And I think it's because of the pre-season. They didn't get to grips with how Celtic play. I think they will be come the end of the season, but we need to get this right. And I'm going to be a bit contradictory here, that I think this
on
is
a podcast. How dare we? I'm very comfortable for this.
Let's hear this.
I mentioned it on the Rangers reaction, and it was a reaction, and I've sat on it for a few days. But I do think this is a good Celtic team with good players. But at the same time, I feel it's kind of the end of the road for a lot of players in here. You already mentioned Kyogo.
It's about to be 30, I think. Kyogo next
another
next
thing.
couple of months.
Maybe not January's transfer, but I did hear rumours that they wanted him in January. At which point, I'd be like,
So again,
show me the bunts.
Again, I'm going to be, well, if you can get money for Kyogo, take it. But that also means that Celtic need to go out and get somebody as good as
risky,
him. Is that going to happen? Who knows? But Kyogo, love him, brilliant. But been here 4 years, and it just seems like it's no working in this team. Still a good player, still will score goals for Celtic, still could be a very good player. Hatate, after the last performance in the Derby, the Cup final and the Champions League, I don't see it from him anymore in these big games. And Wiley can turn it on the odd time. He was brilliant against Leipzig. That's now the outlier this season, and a bit longer. You've said, Stephen, he's a liability in derbies. And guys like Greg Taylor, Liam Scales, it just seems to, maybe it's time to just move beyond those guys. And that doesn't mean you're just going to go out and buy players that are better than them and replace them, because that's easier said than done.
A new cycle.
Yeah, because that team that started against Rangers, apart from Kasper Schmeichel, that all players that were here when Brendan Rodgers arrived. Nicholas Kuhn's the only one that's came in, and even then it didn't work out for him at the start. So you're looking at 2 players, and he's brought in a lot of players since then. So I kind of feel it's just an end of the cycle for this team, and it leads to more look like Brendan's team. I need to see players that he's brought in starting and playing every week, and maybe it is that all our midfielders I look at and go, we've got 5 midfielders, all good players, but they're all number 8s. We need to see a bit more a speciality from some of them.
Yeah.
Learned his lesson, hasn't he? Last time we in the old studio, he wore what was that shirt you wore that you got pelters for in the comments? Bohemians.
Oh yeah.
You got a lot of taking no chances with Martin McGuinness's sweater this week, are you? On that bombshell. Well, okay. We will see you next week. Thank you very much, and support us on Patreon.